Bolovinaka, Namaste and good evening. Our show tonight will focus on a few issues that matter to us, close to our hearts, and it's in relation to the Itoke community and the setting up or the re-establishment of the Great Council of Chiefs. In studio tonight on Fiji Village Straight Talk, I have Graham Leung, the GCC review team member. And thank you, Graham, for coming forward and accepting our invitation on behalf of the people of Fiji for them to find out about the work of the GCC review team. What does the GCC mean for the people of Fiji? Proposed revamped version of it, and how things are going forward. So, Vinava Levu for coming forward to talk to us.
Thank you, Vijay. It's a pleasure.
Now, the Great Council of Chiefs existed in Fiji from 1876 and was disestablished by the Vorenke Bainimarama-led government in March 2012. Through a Itoke Affairs regulation, it was re-established last month and set on Bow Island. However, the review continues on a revamped GCC. Mr. Leung, please explain the terms of reference of the review team.
Very simply, Vijay, it's to look at what and how a revamped GCC might look like, how it might be funded sustainably, what kind of new governance or legal arrangements might be put in place to re-establish the GCC, and to consider the kind of objectives that the GCC ought to be setting moving forward into the 21st century. In other words, Vijay, a GCC fit for purpose, given the kind of recent social, economic and political changes that have happened in the country over the last 16 years and beyond.
We'll talk about it more, and as you know that our guest tonight is also a former president of the Fiji Law Society, a prominent lawyer who was in the country, and also when the events of 2006 happened, was raising several concerns, making statements at the time, and we will be talking about different issues as we go along. Now, Mr. Leung, why is it important for the people to engage in this GCC review consultation?
The GCC was, at some point at least, a symbol of national unity. It has not always succeeded in that role. At times, historically, there were aberrations and perceptions that it perhaps was politically partisan. But moving forward, it's very important that the GCC Review Committee hears as many voices as possible, because the GCC, when it is reset, could provide a useful roadmap for the country moving forward. It could be a symbol of national unity. It has historically been the place where the traditional leaders and chiefs of Fiji have sat and met and deliberated upon matters affecting the Fijian people. So we need to hear from people as to what their expectations are of the GCC as we look at the next 50 to 100 years.
When the GCC was disestablished in 2012, Mr. Bainimarama had said it was a British setup anyway, and accused it of being very political and elitist group. What are your thoughts on that, and what are people saying during these review consultations?
In some respects, Mr. Bainimarama was correct that it was a British colonial idea. But I think the suggestion that the body is and was elitist is a little simplistic. Because when you look at the Vanua structure, of this country, when you look at the historical origins of the GCC, yes, it is true. It was comprised of chiefs, but chiefs have people under them. Chiefs listen. Chiefs don't operate in isolation. So when the chiefs sat in the GCC, they not just represented themselves. They represented Avanua, they represented Yavusa, they represented Batangali as well as Toka. So the views of the people were heard through their chiefs. So as I mentioned, to dismiss the GCC as being elitist is somewhat exaggerated, I would suggest.
What are the thoughts coming through during the consultations right now? I believe you've gone to 10 provinces.
Yes, we have, Vijay. We've got 4 provinces left, and we need to hear the voices also. We would like to hear the voices of the people of Rotuma. But a number of common themes and issues have arisen. We're hearing very loudly and clearly the view that people would like to see a GCC that is independent. Independent of what? Independent of political influence. People would like to see a GCC which is neutral. That is to say, a GCC that doesn't take sides in political arguments, if you like. A GCC that looks after the interests of the people. Most of the submissions have been from indigenous people, which isn't surprising given the historical background and establishment of the GCC. People would like to see a GCC which is visionary. In other words, one that looks into the future, one that is broad and enlightened in its outlook. So these are some of the themes, Vijay, that have been recurrent in the last few weeks that we've been traveling the country, soliciting the views of the people as we've gone around Fiji.
We've been covering some of the consultations, and some of the people are coming out clearly. They are saying they do not want the chiefs who are members of the GCC or who will be members of the GCC to be politicians as well. Is that coming out strongly? Because we haven't covered all the provinces, but what's the thought process coming through in relation to that?
I think more and more people would like to see a GCC which is not connected in any way to politicians and to political parties. And the reason for that is obvious. Once you bring politicians into the GCC, the thinking behind the submission is that invariably they will bring a political agenda. And with that, it would undermine the, if you like, the purity of the discussions in the Vanua context.
The Itoke Affairs regulation that re-established the GCC just for the meeting on Bau Island, you see that the Minister for Itoke Affairs and also one of the ex-officio members as the Prime Minister, the other one as the President. So this is, and it was clearly stated, this is just a transitional period where we are going into before the review team hands in its report and then a revamped GCC comes in. So based on that, do we expect changes on how the membership was allocated in this transitional period?
I think, Vijay, it would be presumptuous of me to start predicting what the membership might look like, because the committee has so far been soliciting submissions, obtaining views of the people. We haven't as yet started the difficult and complex job of deliberating and writing our report. So I don't want to preempt any questions of what this revamped GCC might look like. But yes, it is correct that I do believe that when they met in Bau a few weeks ago, that was supposed to be a transitional arrangement which was not intended to preempt any possible outcomes of membership or otherwise that might flow from the recommendations or conclusions of the review committee.
Can you please give some of the highlights? We know you wouldn't be giving everything, but for the people of Fiji, the committee made a presentation to the GCC based on the work that you had done. I think by that time covered nine provinces. The presentation done and the responses received from the members of the GCC.
I think more and more indigenous Fijians are concerned about resources. When I say resources, I mean land, gravel, the extraction of sand from some of the native lands, the overfishing and exploitation of traditional fishing grounds. And there's an expectation also that the GCC could and should play a greater role in the economic empowerment of the indigenous Fijians. A lot of Tokay are worried and concerned and are having to deal with the difficulty or the issue that they own 92% of the land, and yet they comprise 75%, apparently, of the poverty statistics. And people are bewildered by this. They're confused about this. They're asking, how is it that we own so much of the resources, and yet we are such a large part of the poverty statistics? It doesn't quite gel in many minds. And so the feeling out there, Vijay, is they would like to see the GCC do something about this. What that something might be and how it would look like is obviously a different matter. Because as you know, the GCC doesn't even have a permanent secretariat. It doesn't have permanent staff. It doesn't have any staff. It sits typically once or twice a year. Yet all these expectations have built up over the years that somehow the GCC is going to wave the magic wand and produce all the answers that's going to be the salvation of the indigenous people, that would lift them out of poverty, produce goods and services. So I think we have to, in some respects, temper our expectations of the GCC. Historically, it's always been an advisory body. It's never been an implementing agency. It's not a parallel government. That's what governments do. Governments build roads and hospitals and nursing stations and schools because they can draw money from the treasury to do that.
And that's what the Prime Minister made clear during the GCC meeting, that the recommendations will come from the GCC, but the government will make the final decision as per the legal and constitutional setup. We'll be back after this break.
Why are we playing outside?
Because my dad is thinking my home is going to be super cool.
No way!
Yeah, he makes me a new desk.
Whoa, then we can stay together.
He knows you're going to paint my walls.
Where did he get this tooth from?
Kasabi is there for everything you need.
I wish my dad could do that.
Because your dad is not Kasabi's dad.
Dad, go to Kasabi's!
Get ready for the biggest event of the year, Fiji Showcase 2023. Enjoy international entertainment, delicious food, thrilling rides, and most importantly, unbeatable deals on thousands of products. Get ready to shop, eat, and have fun at Fiji Showcase 2023. From June 30th to July 8th, Fiji Showcase 2023 is coming to the Vodafone Arena in Suva with 9 days of non-stop excitement you won't want to miss out. Mark your calendars and we'll see you there.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight, member of the Great Council of Chiefs review team, Graham Leung, and also former president of the Fiji Law Society. We talked about the last Fiji Bureau of Statistics survey, Mr. Leung. It was revealed that 75% of the E2K that was surveyed lived in poverty. From your perspective, what do you think the GCC can do? It's a connecting question from our last question to assist in this critical area.
I think the GCC can play a bigger and more effective role in just guiding the Tokay in terms of the usage of their resources. With the land that's available, obviously agriculture is is potentially a very big contributor to the reduction of poverty. The GCC can certainly be in a very strong position to guide the indigenous people as to the usage of their resources, as to the priorities of the Tokay in terms of prioritizing education, in terms of the usage of time, in terms of issues such as domestic violence, strengthening of the family, the organization of villages and so on. Because the GCC, because of the Vanua structure, is connected to the provincial councils, the Tikina councils, and this percolates right down to the village level.
What are your thoughts on people saying that the GCC coming back will be only looking after the interest of the E2K? Some even saying that it is a racist approach.
I think that criticism, Vijay, is misguided and unfair. You have to remember that when the GCC was set up originally by, I think it was Sir Arthur Gordon, around 1876, soon after the deed of cession and when Fiji was ceded to Great Britain, the GCC was conceived by the colonial governors to look after the interests of the Tokay, because they were the only inhabitants of Fiji then, the traditional landowners. And then, as you know, come 1879, we had the commencement of indenture. And then we had indenture, of course, which ended around 1920. So the suggestion that the GCC is racist is unfair and ignores the history of the GCC. The GCC has always been comprised in the main of chiefs that have been generous and visionary and inclusive. When we look at the history of the passage of the Native Land Trust Ordinance around 1944, this was during the time of the late Ratusalala Sakuna, and Ratusalala Sakuna convinced his fellow chiefs in the GCC after several attempts that they would relinquish control of their traditional lands under their authority to a statutory body. It's very easy now that we take for granted leases, but it wasn't always the case. It wasn't always the case that you could lease native lands. And who do we give the credit for that innovation and that legislative change? It was the GCC, comprising chiefs at the time, who made that very significant decision. And today, we all benefit from lands that have opened up. It's allowed for the growth of the economy. So, when you look at the GCC and make an allegation that it's racist and exclusive, I think it diminishes and unfairly criticizes the important role that the GCC has played in our historical development.
I believe you have also taken submissions from non-Itoke during your consultations, and what is the feedback like from them?
In fact, almost all of the non-Tokay submissions we've received have been very supportive of the GCC. They want to see the GCC back. They see the GCC, if you like, as a father figure of the nation. They would like not necessarily membership of the GCC, but a pathway. So if they've got complaints, their complaints can be ventilated, so to speak, on the floor of the GCC. So a lot of our Indian brothers and sisters in the rural areas in particular, who live alongside Fijian communities in villages, they've happily coexisted for a very long time. And I was very impressed and not surprised in many of these rural outposts with the degree of harmony that exists between the races.
I know you're not a medical doctor, but NCDs is a big issue in Fiji. A high percentage of that makes up the total amount of deaths every year, and a high percentage of that deaths are from the Itoke community. Eating habits, abuse of alcohol, cigarettes, drugs is becoming a big issue. What do you think needs to be done in this area, and whether the GCC, a revamped GCC, could provide some guidance in this area?
It's a very complex issue, and there are cross-cutting considerations that have contributed to the problem. You've mentioned NCDs. I think obviously a lot of it is related to issues of poverty, issues of employment or unemployment, issues of poor diet, issues of lifestyle. And the GCC, there's all these expectations about what the GCC can or cannot do, but maybe our expectations may need to be revised because a lot of these issues require expertise in medical science, in food and nutrition. You've talked about drugs. Again, we need experts to be giving advice to the GCC, and perhaps that's something they can certainly look at, because most of the poverty statistics, as you've mentioned, affect the indigenous people more than anyone else. I think you've mentioned the figure that's being touted now is 75%, and that figure, I think, gives cause for concern that if we don't address this, then we're sitting on a time bomb.
Violence against women and girls. In Fiji, at least 3 in 5 women, or 60% of women, have faced some form of domestic violence, while 1 in 5 have faced some form of sexual harassment in the workplace. The National Plan to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls in Fiji 2023 to 2028 was just launched last Friday. What can be the role of the chiefs and the GCC to drive the change in mindset that promotes equality and safe spaces for our women and girls?
I think, first of all, the chiefs themselves would probably find it useful to have training and exposure to many of these issues that are pressing and require addressing. Whether they've got the expertise and the experience to be dealing with these issues is another matter, but there's no reason why they cannot seek advice from the experts. As I mentioned, these are very complex issues. Not everybody understands those issues, and I don't think that without assistance anybody can indicate what the solutions are. But I think this requires a unified national approach. It's just not the GCC, it's the government, it's the GCC, it's civil society, political parties, the media. All of us in this country have a role to play in the reduction of poverty, in the reduction of crime, in addressing domestic violence. Ultimately, education is going to be the key. Educating boys and men, girls and women, empowering society, empowering men to bring about a society which respects women, which reduces and eliminates domestic violence. We cannot continue like this. So it's work in progress.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break.
Why are we playing outside?
Because my dad is thinking my home is gonna be super cool.
No way!
Yeah, he makes me a new desk.
Whoa, then we can stay together.
He's also gonna paint my walls.
Where did you get this tool from?
Kasabian, they have everything you need.
I wish my dad could do that.
Because your dad is not Kasabian's dad.
Dad, go to Kasabian!
Get ready for the biggest event of the year, Fiji Showcase 2023. Enjoy international entertainment, delicious food, thrilling rides, and most importantly, unbeatable deals on thousands of products. Get ready to shop, eat, and have fun at Fiji Showcase 2023. From June 30th to July 8th, Fiji Showcase 2023 is coming to the Vodafone Arena in Suva with 9 days of non-stop excitement you won't want to miss out. Mark your calendars and we'll see you there.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight, a member of the Great Council of Chiefs review team and former Fiji Law Society President Graham Leung. We had also invited Ratu Timothy Tavanavanua Rokotuimbau and Dr. Chone Palendrokandroka, the GCC review team chair. Unfortunately, they have been unavailable. And we expect Mr. Leung and the two gentlemen to come back to us as they continue to do their work. As we have promised on Straight Talk, that we will be bringing the GCC review team for progress on what is happening in terms of the consultations, so that you, the members of the public, know how it is progressing. Mr. Leung, it was confirmed by the Itoke Affairs Minister, Ifremi Vasu, that of the 6,290 chiefly titles in Fiji, only 2,892, and that's 47%, have been confirmed by the Itoke Lands Commission. 3,398 titles are still vacant. What is the feedback in relation to more than 50% of the chiefly titles in Fiji left vacant?
That really hasn't featured, Vijay, in the consultations that we've undertaken in the last few weeks. Obviously, the Ministry of Toke Affairs is concerned about those chiefly titles not being filled, but strictly speaking, that's beyond the remit or scope of our review. I think it's in the best interests of all concerned that as many chiefly titles are filled as quickly as possible, because the vacuum when the titles are not filled is not helpful to the stability and the integrity of the various places where the chiefs need to be installed. In some places we've heard that there's a lack of historical memory of how some of these installations or processes are, which should lead to the selection of chiefs. And so some of the different places need to be, if you like, reschooled in terms of the procedure that leads to the anointment or selection of a chief. And the process too of consultation within those different vanua does take time. As you know, recently the Vonivalu of Bau was installed not so long ago, and that chiefly title, which is one of the most senior ones in Fiji, has been long vacant. I think for close to 30 years.
Since 1989.
That's correct, when the last Vunivalu died.
Now, the issue in relation to the chiefly titles not being filled, a lot is being said because when you become a chief, you come with your traditional obligations. There's an expectation as well. And over the past years, the least money distribution, when it went into equal distribution, everybody's getting the same money. Then the chief, the expectation is still there, but the chief cannot deliver based on the money. Is that maybe one of the driving concerns from your personal point of view?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting and very astute observation on your part. Now, I'm not aware of the details, but I think the so-called equalization of lease monies, democratization of lease monies, may actually be a contributing factor. Now, apparently, a 10-year-old in a Matangali would get the same lease money as a 50-year-old. And as you know, traditional chiefly leaders carry the bulk of the obligations in the vanua. So the original lease distribution procedure was based on that understanding of how the vanua works. The money that the chief receives as head of the Yavusa and head of the Matangali is for a purpose, and typically those purposes were to support and carry the people under him or her. Now, when that lease money was reduced and equalized, the chief was still left carrying the obligation, minus the financial resources to enable him to do his job or her job. And that was something that was raised quite frequently as we went around Fiji. The disconnect, if you like, between the chiefly obligation and the resources that were previously available to the chiefs to enable them to carry out their chiefly traditions and obligations. So that was a real concern.
There's an expectation. I think the percentage, and we checked with the Itoke Affairs, the previous arrangement was 5%, 10%, and 15%, based on the Matangali head, the head of the Yavusa, and the Turangani Koro getting those percentages. And the question then coming up amongst the communities whether the chiefs, with that money now unavailable, are stuck in a place where they cannot even function.
I think they are stuck in a place where they cannot function. You know, everything now is money. Whether you're dealing with traditional obligations to do with births, marriages, funerals, all the different kind of rituals, the rich rituals that form part of the social fabric of Tokay society. All of it costs money. Whether you need to hire a bus from Rewa to go to Tavua to take someone there for the first time to their mother's village, it ends up being the responsibility of the chief of the area to gather the people together, gather the resources, and make the event happen. Or it's a reunification of two tribes that have not recently met for the last 20 years. All the many kind of traditional functions and ceremonies that the indigenous people have. Typically, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the chief, but the chief has to be resourced to carry out his or her duties.
The new proposal, of course, states that the Matangali head gets 7%, Yavusa head 5%, and Turangani Koro 3%, and the rest of the money to be equally divided amongst the members of the Matangali. That is much lower than the 5, 10, and 15. That's the new GCC that has come back with that recommendation, and of course that will go to the government to have a look at that. There was another issue in relation to the Itoke who live in the urban areas. They continue to get the lease money, and but the people living in the villages saying they are not contributing. when we have asked those Itoke living in the urban areas, they have said, some have clearly said, well, I am not obliged to give what I get back to the village because that's not in the system. How can that be worked out going forward, knowing that we have the modern Itoke who lives in the urban area, they've got their traditional lease money coming through. That is something too that is that coming through in the review consultation?
Not so far, but in any event, that's beyond my pay grade. I'm not in the VKB, so I think it'd be presumptuous of me to be making suggestions as to how these lease monies should be directed. I think that's better answered by somebody in the VKB who's a stakeholder and who is represented or in a certain Vanua Matangali. So I'll give that a pass, Vijay.
Fair enough. Participation of more youth and women, that has been talked about. The membership of the GCC that was announced, there were questions raised about the amount of women on the council and whether that can be relooked at, whether the youth can be more engaged more in this process. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, the voices of women in the last couple of weeks since we've started our consultations have become louder. A lot more women want women representation in the GCC. Historically, that's not a new issue. I think as far back as 1965, Ro Maria Matetini, a lady of rank and nobility from Rewa, she was a member of the GCC. But the title of the GCC in the indigenous language is Bose Levu Wakaturanga. It's a meeting of chiefly men. We've got different voices and different opinions that are filtering through. The more traditional participants or submittees would prefer that the GCC be confined largely to male chiefs. And then we've got modern Fijians who are more liberal, who think that it should be opened up, maybe a dedicated 1 seat out of 3 for women. Obviously, these are colliding worlds, the traditional and the modern. How do we reconcile them? It's a thorny question. It's culturally sensitive. We're at a crossroads now in terms of new human rights instruments and obligations, such as the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination against all forms of discrimination against women. But at the end of the day, we also have to remember that the GCC was originally a traditional Fijian body, albeit under the colonial government. Change is always difficult and sometimes painful, and it's human nature to fear change. But I think the question is a really difficult one, and if you try and impose changes again on people, there could be a backlash. So the challenge for us as a review team is to try and reconcile these competing submissions, if you like, modernity versus tradition.
You cannot force change, but definitely we need to have a GCC that's relevant to today's day.
Well, I would accept that proposition. I would also suggest that we are at a crossroads now. The work of the review committee is going to be important in terms of standard setting for the future. It may require of us that we dig deep into our pockets, as it were, and suggest changes that are bold and courageous, and lay out arguments and reasons that will take people along with us on this journey that's progressive, that's forward-looking, that meets the aspirations of this country into the 21st century. So that work is yet to be done. That writing and thinking is yet to be undertaken. But I certainly accept and recognize what you're saying, that the world has moved on from 1944. It may require that we do a fundamental reset. What that reset might look like, I'm certainly not going to preempt that because it would be inappropriate to do so. We will sit as a committee. Our report is due to the Minister by the end of July. It's only a report of recommendations. What happens to that report will be a decision for the political government, obviously. When I say political government, I mean the cabinet. And then the cabinet will then, in its wisdom, determine the best way forward.
There's been another issue linked to more usage of drugs, glue sniffing, increasing rate of crime, lawlessness, people coming out of their villages trying to look for a better life in the urban area, maybe stuck on the streets. The numbers continue to rise. The number of people loitering, the number of people living on the streets, the majority of them, again, they eat okay. What can be done to ensure that there's changes? You talked about agriculture. We are land rich, a lot of land available, agriculture activity needed so that we can progress. How can increasing level of crime and lawlessness be dealt with, knowing that the police are also calling out on community leaders to assist?
Again, that's a complex question. There's not going to be a silver bullet to solving the crime problem. It's related to systemic issues of wealth distribution, of opportunity, related also to poverty and unemployment. It's related to the breakdown of the family. And you see this phenomenon anyway when you look around the world today with globalization. Moral values have declined. Urbanization has increased in almost every country. Labor mobility has increased since the COVID, and people are looking for opportunities. So I think we start with the family, Vijay. The breakdown of the family structure, the weakening of family values. You learn your values of discipline and hard work and being a law-abiding citizen. Those are values that are instilled in every one of us in the family. But once the family unit breaks down, I think you will see a gradual, and have seen a gradual erosion of values and morality. But we've got to work a lot harder in terms of reducing the gap in this country between the haves and the have-nots. And we need to work harder at that. And I'm not sure that we've done enough in the recent past. So this government, this new coalition, has its work cut out for it.
Erosion of culture and tradition. There's a lot of talk going on about. We had some ocean scientists and people from USP here on the show a few weeks ago talking about traditional knowledge, that a lot of our people, they're losing knowledge on marine species, which was well known among the fishermen clan in the past, and the knowledge of doing traditional presentations when you're going for formal traditional ceremonies, be it funeral and weddings, etc. What can be done to ensure that we have continuing knowledge sharing in terms of culture, heritage and language?
There is some suggestion of setting up a Tokay Institute of Culture and culture in all its forms, not just in terms of traditional knowledge about fishing, but of music and dance and protocol A lot of young Tokay children today, if you ask them, what's the name of your Matangali? Many of them don't know. I've asked quite a few urban Fijians or Tokay, where do you come from? That's the first question typically a Fijian asks another Fijian. And I said, what's the name of your village? Or where do you come from? Rewanga. No, I meant the name of your Matangali. So just simple things like that. It tells you now that there's a growing urbanization, modernization of the young Tokay. They're on TikTok, they're on Instagram and Facebook. But there's this disconnect between their traditional vanua and villages and the urban setting that many of them find themselves in. Somebody was mentioning the other day that Fijian mats have become more expensive because fewer and fewer indigenous women are weaving mats. Some are losing the ability to weave mats. And then I found out quite surprisingly that apparently mat weaving isn't even taught at ACS, but they teach it at the international school. And I found that, that's very surprising. You'd think that ACS is where the indigenous women go to high school, and yet it's being taught at the international school, which is at Ladala Beach. So I think there's really a need for this, and maybe this is the GCC will consider this, and but at the end of the day, it requires funding. Somebody's got to fund this and set it up. But when I was in New Zealand recently, I was very impressed with the renaissance of Maori culture. It's everywhere, and it's celebrated and strengthened and invigorated. And I think we've now reached a point, there's almost political recognition that unless we bring this back, this is who we are in terms of our identity. We are still a multiracial society, but we've also got to celebrate and recognize the place of indigeneity in this society, the place of the first settlers. The food preservation techniques that the indigenous people practiced before hurricane. The breadfruit was dug and put in pits and saved for another day before refrigeration. The fish gathering techniques, the traditional medicines. I've got a book in my library written by Dr. Suliana Siwatimbao, a hard-covered book where she's covered almost every ailment, from cancer to diarrhea, etc., etc. The name of the herb in Fijian, the scientific name, and the use to which this herb can be used. Indigenous medicine, and so on. Indigenous practices with regard to forgiveness and reconciliation, in the treatment of those that break the law, and so on. The whole range and the whole spectrum of indigenous knowledge. I don't think this is something that we've really seriously recognized or promoted in the past. And I think this is the time now that we need to recognize that, and not just recognize that, do something about it.
I'm not looking at things in isolation here based on GCC and the role it will play. We are also asking people, and even historians have come on the show, about our education curriculum. It's lacking in terms of Fijian history and knowledge. Apparently only one page dedicated to the Girmit and what the Girmitiers came and did in Fiji. Very little on Itoke history, and I think a total amount of pages that was counted, about 31 pages of history of other countries. That was just one example given, and the need to seriously review our education curriculum. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a very good question, Vijay. If we don't learn the lessons of history, we are bound to repeat the mistakes of history. I haven't opened a high school history book recently. I left high school a long, long time ago, as you can imagine. But what you tell me is disturbing. And I think we need to do something about this. Obviously, the history of Girmit here is very important. how did indenture start, and what was the contribution of our Indian brothers and sisters to this country in terms of opening up sugar and the sugar industry? The Tokay history, I mentioned earlier in our interview about the Native Land Trust Ordinance 1944. All of that history, only now many of our students are learning about the immense contribution of Ratu Selala Sukuna. How much of this is to be found in our textbooks? And then, of course, from 1987, we've had a whole cycle of coups and disruptions to political governance. 1987, 2000, 2006. We cannot whitewash history. The good parts must be told, and also the bad parts of our history. We can't whitewash our history. And our students and our young people of today and of tomorrow, they need to understand our past. Some of the painful lessons of the past, the students must understand, so we don't repeat those mistakes in the future. And certainly the curriculum development unit of the education department, I think, must dedicate a lot of resources and time and thinking into rewriting the school curriculum, particularly for history.
Mr. Leung, my final question, or give you this opportunity now, what is your message to the people out there? You have to submit a report by the end of July. You're still going through your consultation period for the review of the GCC. What is your message to the people out there who would be wondering where they can contact you or how they can give their submission?
Thank you, Vijay. I would urge all of you, ladies and gentlemen, that may be listening to this program, please come forward and give us your views on what you would like to see the GCC doing in the future. What kind of objectives it should be setting for itself and for Fiji. This GCC review is not confined to any ethnicity or any racial group. You are most welcome to submit your views, and there's no such thing as a wrong view or a right view. You can write to us in English or the Tokay language or Hindi, and the details can be found on the website of the Tokay Ministry. That's the Ministry of Fijian Affairs. We would welcome all your views, and if you could have them sent to us by the 7th of July, we will certainly take them into account when the report of the review committee is drawn up.
Thank you, Mr. Leung, and that's your show for tonight. Until next week, have a good evening.